she was sold for £12,000. Not to the highest bidder, but to the only man in England who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Her veil was made of Brussels lace so thick she could barely see through it. Her hands trembled inside silk gloves that belonged to her sister. And somewhere in the church behind her, her mother was smiling. The first genuine smile Rowena Holbrook had seen on that cold, calculating face in 23 years. Because Lady Elspeth Holbrook had finally found a use for her plain daughter. Welcome to Aristocratic Hearts. I have a confession to make. When I first came across this story, I did not think I would fall for it as hard as I did. But by the end, I was completely undone. And I think you will be too. Welcome to Aristocratic Hearts. I am so grateful you are spending this time with me. Before we begin, I would love to know, where are you right now? What time is it where you are? Whether you are winding down for the night or just starting your day, drop a comment below. I read every single one. Tonight's story is about a woman who spent her entire life being told she was not enough, not beautiful enough, not charming enough, not worthy of love. Her mother compared her to her radiant younger sister at every opportunity, and society, eager to follow Lady Holbrook's lead, whispered that plain Rowena would die a spinster, while golden Clarissa would marry a prince. But when Clarissa eloped with a penniless lieutenant the night before her wedding to the most feared duke in England, the Holbrook family faced ruin. And Lady Elspeth Holbrook made a decision that would change everything. She covered her plain daughter's face with a veil so thick the Duke could not see through it. She dressed her in her sister's wedding gown, and she sent Rowena down the aisle in Clarissa's place. What she did not know, what no one knew, was that the Duke had been watching Rowena Holbrook for 3 years, that he had wanted her from the moment he first saw her sitting alone in a shadowed corner of a ballroom, while all of London fawned over her sister, that every negotiation, every contract, every cold demand had been designed to bring him closer to the woman society dismissed as invisible. When he lifted that veil on their wedding night, he did not gasp because he had been tricked. He gasped because finally, she was his. It began on a cold morning in November in the year 1847, in a house that smelled of roses and resentment, though at first slap came at dawn. Rowena was already awake. She had barely slept lying rigid in her narrow bed in the room at the back of the house, the one that caught neither the morning sun nor the evening light. She had heard Clarissa's door open and close sometime after midnight. She had heard footsteps on the servants' stairs. She had heard the soft whinny of a horse in the stable yard and the creak of carriage wheels on gravel. And she had known even before her mother's maid came pounding on her door. She had known even before she heard her mother's scream echo through the halls of Holbrook House. She had known because Clarissa had been acting strange for weeks, flushed and secretive, slipping away at odd hours, receiving letters she burned immediately after reading. Rowena had known her sister was in love. She just had not known that Clarissa was foolish enough to throw away a duke for a lieutenant with nothing but a handsome face and empty promises. You knew. Lady Elspeth Holbrook stood in Rowena's doorway, still in her nightgown, her graying hair loose around her shoulders, her face twisted with a fury that made her look like something from a nightmare. You knew, and you said nothing. Mother, The slap knocked Rowena sideways. She tasted copper. Her cheek burned with a pain that was sickeningly familiar, This was not the first time her mother's hand had connected with her face, though it was perhaps the hardest blow she had ever received. Stars danced at the edges of her vision, and she had to grip the bedpost to keep from falling. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" Lady Elspeth's voice rose to a shriek. "Do you have any idea what this family has lost? The Duke of Dunmore does not forgive broken contracts. He will destroy us. He will ruin your father's business, call in every debt we owe, ensure that no family in England will ever receive us again. We will be finished, and it will be your fault for not stopping her." Rowena pressed her hand to her cheek. The skin was already swelling, and she could feel the distinct shape of her mother's fingers imprinted on her flesh. By tomorrow, there would be a bruise, another bruise to hide, another mark of her mother's disappointment made physical. I did not know she would run. I only knew she had feelings. I thought she would do her duty despite them. Her duty. Lady Elspeth laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. It was the laugh of a woman watching her entire world collapse, searching desperately for someone to blame. Her duty was to marry one of the most powerful men in England and elevate this family to heights we have never known. Her duty was to be the Duchess of Dunmore, and instead she has thrown it all away for some penniless soldier who will abandon her the moment her dowry runs out. Clarissa loves him. The second slap was even harder than the first. Rowena's head snapped to the side, and this time she did fall. Her knees buckled, and she crumpled to the floor, her ears ringing, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Love. Lady Elspeth spat the word like a curse. Love is a fairy tale for fools and children. Love does not pay debts. Love does not secure social position. Love does not ensure that a family survives and thrives for generations. Only power does that. Only money. Only strategic marriages to men like the Duke of Dunmore. Rowena stayed on the floor. She had learned, over years of similar encounters, that it was safer to stay down than to rise too quickly. Her mother's rages burned hot but brief. If Rowena simply waited, absorbed the fury without resisting, eventually Lady Elspeth would exhaust herself and move on to more practical concerns. She was right. Within moments, her mother had stopped pacing and started thinking. Rowena could see the shift in her expression, the cold calculation replacing hot fury. "The wedding is in 6 hours," Lady Elspeth said slowly. "The guests are already arriving. The church is decorated. The Duke himself is at his townhouse in Mayfair preparing. Then we must send word." "We will send nothing." Lady Elspeth stopped. She turned, and she looked at Rowena, really looked at her, for the first time in years. "We will send a bride." Rowena's stomach dropped. "Mother, you cannot mean—" "You are roughly the same height as your sister, the same build, if a bit thinner. Your hair is the same shade of brown, though hers has more shine. Mother, the veil I ordered for Clarissa is Brussels lace, very thick, very traditional, a bride's modesty preserved until she reaches her husband's chamber." Lady Elspeth smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Rowena had ever seen. "He will not see your face until you are legally wed." "He will know." Rowena's voice cracked. "The moment he lifts the veil, he will know I am not Clarissa. He will have the marriage annulled. He will— By then, it will be too late." Lady Elspeth moved closer, and Rowena instinctively backed away until she hit the wall. Once you are wed, the contract is fulfilled. The Holbrook family has delivered a daughter of marriageable age and suitable birth to the Duke of Dunmore, as promised. If he wishes to petition for annulment, he may try, But such things take years, and in those years we will be safe from his wrath." "And what of me?" Rowena whispered. "What happens to me when he discovers the deception?" Lady Elspeth shrugged. "That is not my concern. You have been a burden on this family for 23 years, Rowena. You have failed to attract a single suitable offer despite 4 seasons. You have contributed nothing to our standing, nothing to our wealth, nothing to our future. This is your chance to finally be useful." The words landed like blows, each one more devastating than the slap. "He will hate me," Rowena said. "He will make my life a misery." "Then at least your misery will serve a purpose." Lady Elspeth turned toward the door. "Be dressed and ready in 4 hours. Speak to no one. If you attempt to warn the Duke or escape this house, I will ensure that you never see the light of day again. Do you understand me?" Rowena understood. She understood that her mother had never loved her. She understood that her mother saw her as nothing more than a spare part, a replacement, a body to be traded when the preferred merchandise was unavailable. She understood that her entire life had been building to this moment, not a triumphant wedding of her own, but a desperate substitution designed to save everyone except herself. She understood, and she said the only thing she could say, "Yes, Mother." Now, it is important to understand what this marriage contract represented in 1847 England. Marriage among the aristocracy was not about love. It was about power, money, and alliances. A duke choosing a bride was like a king choosing a queen. The entire family's fortunes rose or fell on that decision. The Duke of Dunmore was no ordinary duke. His wealth was legendary, £40,000 a year, it was whispered, though some said it was closer to 60. His estates stretched across 3 counties. His influence in Parliament was such that prime ministers consulted him before making major decisions, and his reputation was fearsome. They called him the Cold Duke, the Duke of Stone, the man who had systematically destroyed 3 families who had wronged him, not through violence, but through something worse, through patience, through calculation, through the slow, methodical dismantling of everything they held dear. He had ruined Lord Ashbury by buying up all his debts and calling them in on the same day. He had destroyed the Countess of Merton by exposing her affair to her husband's family, stripping her of her children, her income, and her place in society. He had brought down Sir Harold Finch by revealing evidence of fraud that sent the man to prison and his family to the poorhouse. And now the Holbrooks had broken a contract with this man. Now they had promised him a bride and failed to deliver. But what no one knew, what Lady Elspeth could never have imagined, was that the Duke had never wanted the bride they had promised him in the first place. The wedding gown did not fit. Of course it did not fit. Clarissa was curved where Rowena was straight, full where Rowena was angular. The bodice gaped at the bust. The waist cinched too tightly around Rowena's narrower frame. The sleeves, designed to show off Clarissa's graceful arms, hung loose on Rowena's thinner limbs. Lady Elspeth solved these problems with padding, pins, and a corset laced so tight that Rowena could barely breathe. By the time her mother was finished with her, Rowena looked like a rough approximation of her sister, the same general shape, the same colors, but wrong somehow, like a painting done by a student copying a master's work. But none of that would matter. The veil was a masterpiece of concealment. Layers of Brussels lace cascaded from a coronet of pearls, covering Rowena's face so completely that she could barely make out shapes through the intricate patterns. When she looked in the mirror, she did not see herself. She did not see Clarissa either. She saw a ghost. "Remember," Lady Elspeth said as she adjusted the veil one final time, "you are not to speak until absolutely necessary. Clarissa has a particular way of tilting her head when she addresses someone of rank. Practice it. And for God's sake, do not trip on the hem. The Duke is known for his sharp eyes. Any mistake, any hesitation, any hint that something is wrong, and he may stop the ceremony before the vows are complete." Rowena said nothing. What was there to say? Her father stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking pale and ill. Lord Holbrook had never been a strong man. He had inherited his title and his debts from his own father, and he had spent his entire adult life trying and failing to climb out of the financial pit his family had dug. He had married Lady Elspeth for her dowry. He had raised his daughters to be currency, and now he could not even look at the daughter he was about to sacrifice. "Papa," Rowena said softly as she reached him. He flinched. "Do not speak to me. I cannot bear it. But get in the carriage." He still would not look at her. Just get in the carriage and have done with it. The ride to the church took an eternity, and no time at all. Rowena sat rigid in her seat, her gloved hands clasped in her lap, her heart pounding so hard she was certain her mother could hear it. Through the lace of her veil, London passed in a blur of gray stone, and bare trees and people going about their lives, unaware that inside this carriage a woman was being delivered to her doom. St. George's, Hanover Square, the church where aristocrats married, where futures were sealed, where lives were joined or ruined. It loomed before her like a judgment. "Chin up," Lady Elspeth hissed as they stepped out of the carriage. "Shoulders back. You are about to become a duchess. Act like one." The church was full. Through her veil, Rowena could see perhaps 200 guests, maybe more. The cream of London society, gathered to witness the marriage of the decade, the feared Duke of Dunmore to the beautiful Clarissa Holbrook. They would be expecting golden hair and rosy cheeks and a smile that could light up the darkest room. They would be getting none of those things, but they would not know, not yet. Rowena took her father's arm. He was trembling, or perhaps she was trembling, and she could feel it through his sleeve. She could not tell any more. Everything had become dreamlike, surreal, as if she were watching herself from very far away. The organ began to play. She walked. The aisle stretched before her like a road to the gallows. Each step brought her closer to the altar, closer to the tall figure in black who waited there, closer to the man who would discover within hours that he had been deceived and would either destroy her or— She could not think of another option. There was no other option. The Duke of Dunmore stood with his back to the congregation. He was taller than she had imagined from the glimpses she had caught of him at various social events, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that strained the perfect cut of his dark coat. His hair was black, shot through with threads of silver at the temples, and when he turned to watch her approach, Rowena's breath caught. Even through the veil she could see his eyes. They were gray, not the soft gray of morning mist or the warm gray of dove feathers, but the cold gray of winter storms, of ice on stone, of something ancient and unforgiving. They swept over her approaching figure with an intensity that made her knees weak. He sees, she thought in a panic. He knows. He knows. And he will stop this, and my mother will— But he did not stop it. He did not call out or signal to the priest or turn away in disgust. He simply watched her come to him, those gray eyes tracking her every movement. And when she finally reached the altar and her father placed her hand in his, His fingers closed around hers with a possessiveness that took her breath away. The ceremony began. Rowena heard almost none of it. The priest's words washed over her like water, meaningless sounds that required responses she delivered by rote. She was aware only of the man beside her, the heat of his body despite the cold church, the strength of his hand around hers, the way he had not released her grip even once since she had reached him, and his eyes. Every time she dared to glance at him through her veil, his eyes were on her, watching, waiting, seeing something that no one else seemed to notice. "Do you, Clarissa Ann Holbrook, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Rowena's throat closed. This was it. The lie made permanent. The trap sprung. She thought of her mother, sitting somewhere in the congregation, probably already counting the ways she would spend the Duke's money. She thought of her father, who had not been able to look at her. She thought of Clarissa, somewhere on the road to Scotland with her lieutenant, free and in love and utterly unconcerned with the sister she had left behind to face the consequences. She thought of herself, in all the years to come, hated by a husband who had been deceived, alone in a great house, waiting for the punishment that would surely fall. And she said the words, "I do." The wedding breakfast was a blur of faces and champagne and congratulations that felt like mockery. Rowena sat beside her new husband at the head table, still veiled. A charming tradition, Lady Elspeth had explained to curious guests, the bride's modesty preserved until the marriage is fully consummated, and tried not to vomit. The Duke said almost nothing throughout the meal. He responded to toasts with curt nods. He ignored the attempts of various lords and ladies to engage him in conversation. He ate mechanically, drank sparingly, and kept one hand resting on the table so close to Rowena's that his fingers occasionally brushed her silk-covered ones. Each touch sent a shock through her. She did not know what she had expected from the fearsome Duke of Dunmore. Cruelty, perhaps, cold dismissal, the kind of aristocratic indifference that would allow him to ignore his bride entirely until it was time to do his dynastic duty and produce an heir. She had not expected attention. She had not expected those gray eyes to remain fixed on her throughout the meal, watching her through the lace of her veil with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She had not expected the way his hand found excuses to touch hers, passing a dish, accepting a glass, steadying her when she swayed slightly in her too-tight corset. She had not expected to feel so completely, terrifyingly seen. "You have not eaten." His voice was low, deep, and seemed to resonate in her chest. They were the first words he had spoken directly to her since the ceremony. "I am not hungry, Your Grace." A pause. Then, "You will need your strength." Rowena felt the blood drain from her face. The wedding night. The unveiling. The moment when he would see her face and know, "We will leave within the hour," he continued, as if discussing the weather. "My carriage is waiting. The journey to Dunmore Park takes 4 hours. 4 hours. 4 more hours of anonymity, of hiding behind this veil, of being someone other than plain Rowena Holbrook. She should be grateful for the reprieve. Instead, she felt the weight of those 4 hours pressing down on her like a stone. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "perhaps we might stay in London for the first night. The day has been long, and the journey. We will leave within the hour." It was not a suggestion. It was not even really a statement. It was a command, delivered with the casual authority of a man who had never been refused anything in his life. Rowena fell silent. In truth, she understood coverture well enough to know that argument was futile. From the moment she had spoken her vows, she had ceased to exist as a legal person. She could not own property. She could not sign contracts. She could not refuse her husband's commands or resist his decisions. Her body, her possessions, even her very identity now belonged to Ambrose Carrington, Duke of Dunmore. She was, in the eyes of the law, his property, and in 4 hours he would discover that his property was defective. But she had no idea what was waiting for her at Dunmore Park. None at all. The carriage was black lacquered wood with gold trim, pulled by 4 matched gray horses that cost more than most men earned in their lifetimes. Inside, it was fitted with velvet seats the color of midnight, small lanterns that cast warm shadows, and curtains that blocked out the winter afternoon. Rowena sat as far from her husband as the space would allow, pressing herself into the corner like a cornered animal. Through her veil she could see him sitting across from her, perfectly still, those gray eyes reflecting the lantern light. The carriage lurched into motion, and she gripped the edge of the seat to steady herself. Outside, London began to fall away, the grand townhouses giving way to smaller buildings, then to open fields dusted with November frost. They were heading north and west, toward Dunmore Park, toward whatever future awaited her there. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. The silence was not comfortable. It was the silence of a held breath, of a storm building, of something waiting to break. Rowena kept her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and stared at the curtained window, and tried to control her breathing, and failed. Every few minutes she felt his gaze on her, heavy, penetrating, patient. He made no move to touch her, no attempt to start conversation. He simply watched, as if she were a puzzle he was slowly solving, a code he was methodically deciphering. She wondered what he saw. A trembling woman in borrowed clothes, hiding behind a veil of Brussels lace? Or something else, something that made him look at her with that strange intensity that felt neither hostile nor kind, but something else entirely. "You're afraid of me?" She startled at his voice. "Your Grace? You sit as far from me as possible. You have not spoken. Your hands are shaking." A pause. "You are afraid. I am merely tired, Your Grace. You are lying." The word hung in the air between them, sharp and undeniable. Rowena felt her heart rate spike. Did he know? Already? Did he somehow know? "I have made a study of liars," he continued, his voice almost conversational. "In my line of work, business, politics, the management of vast estates, one encounters them constantly. The nervous ones speak too much, trying to bury their deceptions beneath a flood of words. The confident ones speak too little, believing that silence cannot betray them. But you—" He leaned forward slightly, and even through the lace she could feel the weight of his attention. "You speak precisely enough to seem natural, but your body tells a different story." Rowena's mouth went dry. "I do not know what you mean, Your Grace. Your left hand keeps clenching and unclenching as if preparing to strike or to flee. Your breathing is too controlled, too measured, as if you are consciously regulating it. And you have not looked directly at me since you entered this carriage, though you must be curious about the man you have just married." She forced herself to look at him then, to meet those gray eyes through the obscuring lace. It took every ounce of courage she possessed. "What conclusion do you draw from these observations, Your Grace?" "Several possibilities present themselves." He settled back against the velvet cushions, perfectly at ease, completely in control. "You may fear the wedding night, as many innocent brides do. You may fear me specifically, given my reputation. You may have secrets you are desperate to conceal, or a pause, longer than the others. You may be someone other than who you claim to be. Rowena stopped breathing entirely. "Tell me," he said, and his voice had dropped to something almost soft, "what you think will happen when we arrive at Dunmore Park." Rowena swallowed. I imagine your Grace will wish to exercise his marital rights. And this frightens you? I am inexperienced, your Grace. It is natural to be apprehensive. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, still deep, still resonant, but with an edge that had not been there before. You speak like a woman choosing her words very carefully, like a woman hiding something. He leaned forward slightly, and even through the veil, Rowena could see the intensity in his gaze. "What are you hiding, wife?" "Nothing, your Grace. Another lie. Remove your veil." The command struck her like a physical blow. "Your Grace, tradition dictates. I care nothing for tradition. Remove your veil. Now." Rowena's hands would not move. They sat in her lap like stones, frozen, disobedient. She could hear her own breathing, harsh and panicked inside the cage of lace that had become her only protection. I said, "Please." The word came out as a whisper, desperate and broken. "Please, your Grace. Wait until we reach your estate, I beg you." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "You beg me?" "Yes." "For a few more hours of hiding behind that veil?" "Yes." He studied her for a long moment, and Rowena had the unnerving sense that he could see straight through the lace, straight through her borrowed dress and her trembling hands, and her carefully neutral voice, straight down to the terrified woman beneath. "Very well," he said finally. "You may keep your veil until we reach Dunmore Park, but I want something in return. Anything, your Grace." The corner of his mouth curved, not quite a smile, but something close. "Dangerous words, wife. You should be more careful with your promises. What do you want?" "Your hand." She blinked. "My hand? Give me your hand. You will sit beside me for the remainder of the journey, and you will let me hold your hand." It seemed such a small thing, such a strange thing to ask when he could have demanded so much more. But when Rowena rose on unsteady legs and crossed the small space between them, when she settled onto the velvet seat beside him and placed her trembling hand in his fingers closed around hers with that same possessiveness she had felt at the altar, and she understood. This was not about her hand. This was about control, about claiming, about making her understand in some small way that she belonged to him now. She did not pull away. For the next 3 hours they sat in silence, her hand clasped in his, her shoulder occasionally brushing his arm, when the carriage swayed on an uneven stretch of road. She could feel the warmth of him through their combined layers of fabric, his gloves, her gloves, the wool of his coat and the silk of her sleeve. He was not a cold man, she realized, not physically. Whatever ice people saw in him, it did not extend to his body. He radiated heat like a furnace, and some traitorous part of her wanted to lean into that warmth, to curl against his side and steal some of his strength for herself. But that was madness. In less than an hour, he would discover her deception, and then whatever gentleness he was showing her now would turn to fury. She was certain of it. Dunmore Park rose out of the evening mist like something from a Gothic novel. It was massive, far larger than any house Rowena had ever seen, a sprawling edifice of gray stone and mullioned windows that seemed to stretch toward the darkening sky. Lights blazed in dozens of windows, and servants stood in formation at the great front doors, ready to receive their new duchess. Their new duchess. The words felt like a cruel joke. The Duke, Ambrose, she supposed she should think of him, though the name felt too intimate in her mind, helped her down from the carriage with a courtesy that seemed at odds with his fearsome reputation. His hand was warm and steady at her elbow as he guided her up the steps, past the bowing servants, into a great entrance hall that smelled of beeswax candles and old wood and something else, something green and growing despite the winter cold. "Welcome to your new home," he said, and his voice echoed in the cavernous space. Rowena could not answer. Through her veil she took in the soaring ceilings, the ancestral portraits lining the walls, the grand staircase that curved up into shadows. This was wealth beyond anything her family had ever possessed or even aspired to. This was centuries of power made manifest in stone and wood and gold, and she had stolen her way into it through a lie. "Mrs. Blackwood." Ambrose addressed a stern-faced woman in black who had stepped forward from the line of servants. "See that the Duchess's rooms are prepared. She will want to refresh herself before dinner." "Very good, Your Grace. And send my valet with the key to the east wing." Something flickered across Mrs. Blackwood's face. Surprise, quickly suppressed. "The east wing, Your Grace." "You heard me." "Yes, Your Grace." Rowena felt his hand tighten on her arm. "Come," he said. "There is something I want to show you before the veil comes off." She did not resist when he led her through corridors and up staircases, past rooms glimpsed through open doors, a library stuffed with books, a music room with a grand piano gleaming in the lamplight, a gallery hung with paintings that probably cost more than her father's entire estate. She did not resist because resistance was futile, and because some small, curious part of her wanted to see what the Duke of Dunmore considered important enough to show his bride before he even knew what she looked like. They stopped before a door in what she assumed was the east wing. It was locked. She saw him produce a key from somewhere, heard the heavy click of the mechanism turning. "This room," he said quietly, "has not been opened in 3 years." And then he pushed the door wide and led her inside. At first, Rowena did not understand what she was seeing. The room was large, well appointed, lit by candles that someone, perhaps a servant who had slipped ahead, had already lit. There were comfortable chairs, a fireplace, shelves lined with books, and covering every wall, every surface, every available space, portraits, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds. Large oils in gilded frames, small watercolors on easels, pencil sketches pinned to boards, miniatures in silver cases displayed on tables, all of them depicting the same woman. Brown hair, neither golden nor remarkable. A face that was too angular to be called pretty, with a nose that was slightly too long and a mouth that was slightly too wide. Eyes the color of strong tea, more interesting than beautiful. Rowena knew that face. She saw it every day in the mirror. 3 years ago, Ambrose said, and his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "I attended a ball at the Harrington townhouse. I did not want to go. I had stopped attending social functions years before. The tedium of simpering debutantes and their desperate mothers had grown unbearable. But Harrington was an important political ally, and his wife had specifically requested my presence." Rowena could not speak, could barely breathe. "I arrived intending to stay for precisely 1 hour. Just long enough to be seen, to satisfy my obligations, to maintain the alliance. And then I saw her." He moved to stand before the largest portrait, an oil painting of a young woman sitting alone in a window seat, a book open in her lap, her gaze directed out toward some invisible horizon. The artist had captured something in her expression, some quiet sadness mixed with stubborn resilience that made Rowena's chest ache, because she remembered that night. She remembered sitting in that window seat at the Harrington ball, hiding from the crowds, trying to disappear the way she always did while her sister danced and sparkled and drew every eye in the room. She remembered feeling invisible, feeling worthless, feeling like a ghost haunting the edges of her own life. She had not known anyone was watching. "I could not stop looking at her," Ambrose continued. "She sat alone all evening while her sister held court, and not once did she complain. Not once did she seek attention or validation. She simply existed, quietly, completely, as if she needed nothing from anyone in that room, least of all approval." He turned to face her, and even through her veil she could see the intensity burning in those gray eyes. "I found out her name that night. Rowena Holbrook, the elder sister, the plain one, the one nobody wanted. I had my agents investigate her. I learned everything: her kindness to servants, her intelligence, her patience, her strength. I learned that her mother treated her like a burden, and her sister treated her like a shadow. I learned that despite everything, she had never become bitter." His hand rose, reached toward her veil, stopped just short of touching. "I contracted for her sister," he said, "because her mother would never have agreed to give me the daughter she considered worthless. But I never wanted Clarissa. I never wanted the golden sister with the empty laugh and the calculated charm. I wanted the woman in the window seat. I wanted you, Rowena." And then, very slowly, very gently, he lifted the veil from her face. The cool air hit her skin, and Rowena blinked against the sudden brightness of the candlelight. She felt exposed, vulnerable, stripped bare in a way that had nothing to do with clothing. For the first time in hours, she could see clearly, the room full of her own face, the door through which escape was impossible, and the man standing before her. He was more handsome than she had allowed herself to notice through the obscuring lace. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, that silver-threaded black hair swept back from a high forehead. But it was his eyes that held her, those gray eyes that she had found so cold in the church. They were not cold now. They burned. "There you are," he breathed, and the words sounded like a prayer. "Finally, there you are. You knew." Her voice came out hoarse, cracked. "You knew all along. From the moment you stepped out of the carriage at the church. I recognized your walk, that particular way you have of moving, as if you're trying to take up as little space as possible. Your sister struts, you glide. Then why?" She had to stop, had to swallow, had to try again. "Why didn't you stop it? You could have exposed the deception. You could have destroyed my family as you threatened, and lose you in the process." He stepped closer, and she found herself stepping back, her spine hitting the door she had not heard close behind them. "I have waited 3 years for you, Rowena. I have commissioned paintings of you from every artist in London who had ever glimpsed you at a function. I have collected information about your life, the way other men collect art or horses or political favors. I have wanted you with an obsession that would terrify you if you understood its full depth. Why?" The question tore out of her, raw and desperate. "Why me? I am plain. I am unremarkable. I am nothing. You are everything. He placed his hands on the door on either side of her head, caging her without touching her, and she could feel the heat of his body even through the layers of fabric between them. You are kind when you have every reason to be cruel. You are strong when everyone around you expects you to break. You are intelligent in a world that rewards women only for beauty. And you are so bloody beautiful that it takes every ounce of my control not to worship you on my knees right now. I am not, you are. His voice dropped to a growl. And you have been lied to your entire life. By your mother, by your sister, by a society that values glitter over gold. But I see you, Rowena. I have always seen you. She was trembling. She could not stop trembling. Her entire understanding of herself, of her place in the world, of her value as a human being, was crumbling around her, and in its place something new was rising, something that felt dangerously like hope. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You could have had anyone. Princesses, heiresses, women who would have given anything to be the Duchess of Dunmore. I wanted the woman who would give nothing, who expected nothing, who came to me tonight thinking she was a sacrifice and a deception and a disappointment waiting to happen." He leaned closer, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "I wanted you." The room seemed to spin around her. Portraits, dozens of them, perhaps 100, all bearing her face. Her face, which she had been taught to think of as plain, as unremarkable, as the unfortunate contrast to her sister's golden beauty. And yet here it was, rendered in oils and watercolors and delicate pencil sketches, displayed like the treasures of a museum. "How?" she whispered. "How did you commission these without my knowledge?" "Artists attend social functions," Ambrose said. "They observe, they remember, and when a duke approaches them with a specific commission and a great deal of money, they find ways to recreate what they have observed. But I never posed for. You did not need to pose. You existed. That was enough." She moved deeper into the room, drawn despite herself to examine the portraits more closely. Here was one of her at a garden party, sitting alone on a bench, while laughter and conversation swirled around her, her expression peaceful rather than lonely. Here was another of her in a bookshop, head bent over a volume, completely absorbed in whatever world the pages contained. Here was a third, and this one made her breath catch of her dancing. "I remember this," she said softly. "The Pemberton ball, 3 years ago. A young gentleman asked me to dance out of pity. His mother had scolded him for ignoring the wallflowers. I was mortified. You were magnificent." Ambrose came to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, but not touching. "You moved like music made visible. I had never seen anyone dance with such unconscious grace. And when the dance ended and he bowed and walked away without a second glance, I wanted to destroy him. You did not even know me. I knew enough. I knew that you deserved better than pity dances and careless dismissals. I knew that the world had failed to see what was right in front of it. I knew that I wanted to be the one to show you your own worth." Rowena turned to face him. In the candlelight, surrounded by images of herself, she felt like she was standing in someone else's dream, a dream that had somehow become her reality. "Why did you not approach me? In all these years, why did you never speak to me directly? Because you would have refused me. You cannot know that. I know exactly that." His eyes held hers, unflinching. If the fearsome Duke of Dunmore had approached plain Rowena Holbrook and expressed interest, you would have assumed it was a jest, a cruel trick, some scheme designed to humiliate you further. Your mother's poison ran too deep for you to believe that any man could want you genuinely. The truth of it struck her like a blow. He was right. She would have assumed mockery. She would have fled. She would have spent the rest of her life wondering what game he had been playing. So you contracted for my sister instead. I contracted for a Holbrook daughter. The specific terms were deliberately vague. Your mother assumed I meant Clarissa because she could not imagine anyone wanting you. I allowed her to maintain that assumption because it served my purposes. And if Clarissa had not eloped, if she had gone through with the wedding, something dark flickered in his eyes, then I would have found another way. I always find another way. The implication hung in the air between them, that he would have done whatever was necessary, crossed whatever lines existed, to eventually possess the woman he had decided to claim. It should have frightened her. Perhaps it did frighten her, somewhere beneath the shock and the confusion, and the strange, unwanted warmth spreading through her chest. But it also made her feel, for the first time in her life, like she mattered, like she was worth scheming for, worth waiting for, worth wanting. "This is madness," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Perhaps it is the sanest thing I have ever done." He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek, feather-light. "I have spent 3 years watching you suffer, watching your mother diminish you, your sister overshadow you, society dismiss you. I have spent 3 years wanting to burn it all down and build something better in its place, something where you would be cherished as you deserve. And this?" She gestured at the portraits surrounding them. "This is your version of cherishing? This is my version of worship." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "These are the icons of my obsession. Let me go." Her voice was steadier than she felt. She pressed her palms flat against the door behind her and met his gaze directly, refusing to look away, refusing to crumble under the weight of his intensity. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps? Or respect. "You are my wife," he said. "I am a woman you have caged in a room full of pictures of my own face, which is more disturbing than romantic regardless of how you explain it." The corner of his mouth twitched. "You are not afraid of me. I am terrified of you, but I have been afraid my entire life, and it has never once made a situation better. So I choose not to behave as if I am afraid, even when my heart is pounding so hard I suspect you can hear it. I can. Then you know I am not unaffected by your declarations." She drew a breath, held it, released it slowly. "But declarations are just words. My mother has made many declarations about my worthlessness. My sister has made declarations about loving me while stealing every opportunity that might have been mine. Words mean nothing without action." He was silent for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. She did not. "What would you have me do?" he asked finally. "Step back." He did not hesitate. One moment he was so close she could count his eyelashes. The next he was several feet away, hands clasped behind his back, every line of his body radiating controlled patience. What else? Rowena's mind raced. She had expected him to refuse, to assert his husbandly rights, to take what was legally his. She had not expected compliance. "I want my own chambers," she said, testing, "not a shared room." "Done. The Duchess's suite is already prepared." I want time before we consummate the marriage." A muscle in his jaw tightened, but he nodded. "How much time? A month? A week? 3 weeks? A fortnight?" His eyes glittered. "I have waited 3 years. 14 more days will not kill me, though I make no promises about my sanity. A fortnight. 14 days to understand this man, to test his declarations against his actions, to decide whether she was a treasured prize or merely a new kind of cage." "Very well," she said. "A fortnight. What else?" She thought of her mother, of Clarissa, of all the people who had used her and dismissed her and treated her as less than human. "I want to write to my family," she said slowly, "to tell them that I am not the victim they planned to sacrifice, that I am—" she hesitated, the word feeling strange on her tongue, "that I am valued here. You may write whatever you wish. I will have the letters delivered personally. And I want—" This one was harder. This one required admitting something she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten it existed. "I want to be useful, not just ornamental. I want to learn how to run an estate this size. I want to understand your business holdings. I want to be a partner, not a possession." For the first time, genuine surprise crossed his features. "You want to work? Is that so shocking? Most women in your position would want gowns and jewels and parties. I have spent my entire life watching my sister collect gowns and jewels and invitations to parties. It did not seem to make her happy." Rowena lifted her chin. "I would rather be useful than ornamental. I would rather earn my place than be given it, as a gift that could be revoked at any moment." Ambrose was quiet for so long that Rowena began to fear she had asked for too much, pushed too far, shattered whatever fragile accord they had built. But when he spoke, his voice was rough, with something that sounded almost like wonder. "You continue to surprise me. Is that a yes? That is a yes to everything. Your own chambers, time before consummation, letters to your family, and training in estate management, business holdings, and anything else you wish to learn." He paused. "I have one condition of my own." "Name it." "Dinner. Every evening you will dine with me. Not in silence, not in formal distance, but in conversation. I want to know you, Rowena, not the collection of facts I have gathered, but the woman behind them. I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions, your arguments. I want to understand the mind I have admired from afar." It was such a small thing, such a reasonable thing, and yet it frightened her more than anything else he had demanded. "Very well," she said quietly. "Dinner." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, perhaps, or a deepening of that strange hunger that seemed to live behind his eyes. "Then we have an agreement," he said. "Welcome to Dunmore Park, wife." The first week passed in a blur of discovery and disorientation. Rowena had never lived anywhere as vast as Dunmore Park. Her childhood home had been comfortable enough for a family of their standing. 12 bedrooms, a modest staff, grounds that could be walked in an afternoon. Dunmore Park had over 100 rooms. It had 3 separate wings. It had gardens that stretched for acres, and a home farm that supplied half the county with produce. And it had staff. So many staff. Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper, had served the Carrington family for 30 years. She was stern, efficient, and initially suspicious of her new mistress, particularly when Rowena asked questions about household budgets and staff schedules, and the logistics of feeding 60 servants 3 meals a day. "Your Grace needn't concern herself with such matters," Mrs. Blackwood had said. her tone suggesting that such concern was inappropriate. "My Grace wishes to understand how her household operates," Rowena had replied. "If that presents a difficulty, I shall discuss the matter with His Grace at dinner this evening." Mrs. Blackwood's expression had shifted to something approaching respect. "I shall prepare the household accounts for your Grace's review." The transformation in the housekeeper's demeanor over the following days was remarkable. Once she understood that Rowena's interest was genuine, that the new Duchess actually wanted to learn rather than simply interfere. Mrs. Blackwood became an invaluable ally. She explained the complex hierarchy of the household staff, from the butler and housekeeper at the top, down through footmen and housemaids and scullery servants. She walked Rowena through the seasonal rhythms of a great house, the spring cleaning, the summer preparations for visitors, the autumn preserving, the winter economy. "Your predecessor, the late Duke's mother, had no interest in such matters," Mrs. Blackwood confided one afternoon, as they reviewed the linen inventory together. "She left everything to the staff and complained when things were not to her liking. It is refreshing to have a mistress who wishes to understand." "Understanding breeds competence," Rowena said, "and competence breeds respect. I would rather earn my position here than simply occupy it." The words hung in the air between them, and Rowena saw something shift in Mrs. Blackwood's eyes, a decision being made, an allegiance being formed. "You will do well here, Your Grace," the housekeeper said quietly. "The house needed someone like you, whether it knew it or not." Mr. Thorne, the estate manager, had been similarly surprised when Rowena appeared in his office the second morning, asking about crop rotations and tenant relations and the upcoming spring planting. "The Duke handles such matters personally, Your Grace. The Duke has many demands on his time. Surely a second set of eyes would be useful, particularly eyes attached to someone who has no other pressing obligations." Mr. Thorne had looked at her for a long moment, then smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from anyone at Dunmore Park. "I suspect, Your Grace, that you are not at all what anyone expected. I suspect, Mr. Thorne, that you are entirely correct." He took her on a tour of the home farm that afternoon, explaining the rotation of crops and the breeding program for livestock, and the improvements that had been made to tenant cottages over the past decade. Rowena asked questions, so many questions that by the end of the day, Mr. Thorne was laughing at her enthusiasm. "Your Grace has the mind of a natural estate manager," he said, as they rode back toward the great house in the fading winter light. "I had the raising of a woman who believed I was good for nothing," Rowena replied. "Discovering that I might actually be good for something is intoxicating. Now, I should pause here to tell you something important about women and property in this era. Under the laws of coverture, everything Rowena now learned about, the estates, the investments, the tenant agreements, the household accounts, legally belonged to her husband. She could advise him, she could even manage things in his name, but she could never own any of it herself. If Ambrose died without explicitly providing for her in his will, she could be turned out of Dunmore Park with nothing but her widow's jointure, dependent on the goodwill of whatever male relative inherited. Rowena understood this. She had always understood it. But understanding something intellectually and feeling its weight were very different things. As she walked the corridors of this great house, as she learned the names of servants and the boundaries of estates, as she began to see the shape of the empire her husband controlled, she felt the precariousness of her position like a blade against her throat. She was valued now, but she could be devalued at any moment. The only protection was to make herself indispensable, not become so woven into the fabric of Dunmore Park that removing her would tear holes that could never be mended. And so she worked. She worked harder than she had ever worked in her life, learning systems and names and histories and connections. She visited tenants with Mrs. Blackwood and discussed their concerns with genuine interest. She reviewed accounts with Mr. Thorne and identified inefficiencies that no one had noticed, because no one had looked. She organized the household staff with a precision that came from years of managing her own family's servants, while her mother and sister took credit for the work. And every evening she dined with her husband. Those dinners were strange and wonderful and terrifying in their intimacy. Ambrose, she had begun thinking of him by his name, though she still addressed him formally aloud, was not what she had expected. The cold, fearsome Duke of Dunmore transformed in the candle-lit intimacy of the small dining room he preferred to the formal hall. He asked questions about her day, her discoveries, her opinions on everything from agricultural policy to the novels she had begun borrowing from his extensive library. He listened to her answers with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously seen and stripped bare. And he watched her. Always, always, he watched her. The first dinner had been awkward, filled with silences that stretched too long and questions that neither of them quite knew how to answer. Rowena had picked at her food, hyper-aware of his gaze, wondering what he saw when he looked at her now that the veil was gone and there was nowhere left to hide. But by the third dinner, something had shifted. He had asked her about a book he had noticed her carrying, a volume of poetry by someone she had never heard of, and she had found herself explaining her love of verse, the way words arranged just so could capture feelings that prose could never quite reach. "Read me something," he had said. "Now? Now." And so she had retrieved the book and read to him by candlelight, her voice trembling at first and then steadying as she lost herself in the rhythm of the words. When she finished, she looked up to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite name. "Again," he said, "read me another." She read to him every night after that. Sometimes poetry, sometimes passages from novels, sometimes letters from historical figures whose correspondence filled the shelves of his library. He never interrupted. He simply listened and watched, and occasionally reached across the table to refill her wine glass with a tenderness that made her chest ache. On the fifth night, he read to her. His voice was different from hers, deeper, rougher, unpracticed at performance, but somehow more affecting for its lack of polish. He read her a passage from Marcus Aurelius, something about the nature of change and the importance of accepting what cannot be controlled, and Rowena found herself leaning forward, drawn in by the sound of him, by the shape of the words in his mouth. "You read philosophy," she said, when he finished. "I read everything. Philosophy, history, economics, agriculture." He set the book aside. "But I confess that poetry has always escaped me. The emotional openness of it, the vulnerability. And yet you asked me to read it to you. I asked you to read it to me because I wanted to understand. And because—" He paused, something almost hesitant in his expression. "Because I wanted to hear your voice." The confession hung between them, small and enormous. "You could have commanded me to read," she said quietly. "You command everything else." "I could have, but I did not want your obedience. I wanted your participation, freely given. You have accomplished more in 1 week than most estate managers achieve in a year," he said on the 7th evening, as they sat across from each other with glasses of wine and the remains of an excellent meal. "I have had excellent teachers. You have had teachers who were initially reluctant to teach you anything. Their conversion to enthusiasm is entirely your own achievement. Rowena felt heat rise to her cheeks. I merely asked questions. You asked the right questions. There is a difference. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those gray eyes that she had learned to read a little better. Right now, they held warmth, and something darker, something that made her pulse quicken. You are not at all what anyone expected. So I have been told. Does it bother you? The surprise? She considered the question carefully. She had learned that he valued thoughtful answers over quick ones. It bothers me that anyone expected anything at all. My mother's narrative about my deficiencies was so thorough, so consistent, that even I believed it. To discover that the narrative was wrong, or at least incomplete, is disorienting. More disorienting than finding a room full of portraits of yourself? A laugh escaped her, surprised and genuine. That was extremely disorienting, though I confess I have gone back to look at them. Have you? They are very good likenesses. Better than anything I might have commissioned for myself, if I had ever had the vanity to do so. She met his eyes. The woman in those paintings looks different than the woman I see in the mirror. How so? She looks like someone worth painting, worth looking at, worth— She stopped, suddenly aware that she had said too much. Worth what? Nothing. Rowena. His voice dropped, and the use of her name sent a shiver down her spine. Worth what? She looked at her wine-glass, at the fire, at anything but him. Worth wanting, she whispered. The silence stretched. When she finally forced herself to look at him, his expression had changed, hardened into something fierce and almost angry. Come here. We agreed. I am not going to touch you. But I need you to come here. She rose on unsteady legs, crossed the small distance between her chair and his, stood before him, close enough that she could see the silver threads in his black hair, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the rapid pulse beating in his throat. Closer. She stepped closer. Kneel. Her breath caught. Your Grace. Trust me. It was such a strange request, such a vulnerable position, but she had learned, over this strange week, that Ambrose Carrington did nothing without purpose. And so she knelt on the plush carpet before his chair, and looked up at him, and waited. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were warm, slightly rough, steadying. You are worth everything, he said, and his voice was rough. Everything I have, everything I am, everything I have spent 3 years building and planning and scheming to achieve. And the fact that your mother made you believe otherwise is a crime for which I intend to make her pay. Rowena's eyes widened. What? Did you think I would let the abuse stand? The years of cruelty, of belittlement, of systematic destruction of your sense of self-worth. His thumbs stroked her cheekbones, gentle despite the fury in his eyes. I have destroyed men for less. I will certainly destroy the woman who made you believe you were worthless. She is my mother. She is a monster, and monsters must face consequences. Ambrose. His name slipped out before she could stop it, and she saw something flare in his eyes at the sound. What do you intend to do? What I do best. His smile was cold, but his hands remained gentle on her face. Dismantle her life piece by piece until she understands exactly what she threw away when she discarded you. The fortnight passed faster than Rowena had expected. She learned more about Dunmore Park in those 14 days than she had learned about anything in the previous 23 years. She learned that Ambrose had inherited the dukedom at 19, after his father and older brother died in a carriage accident. She learned that he had spent the subsequent 15 years transforming a crumbling legacy into an empire through sheer force of will and ruthless intelligence. She learned that his fearsome reputation was carefully cultivated, a shield against the vultures who had circled his young, vulnerable self, waiting to pick the bones of his inheritance. And she learned that underneath the ice and the control and the devastating competence, there lived a man who had been just as lonely as she had. My mother died when I was 7, he told her one evening, as they walked through the garden in the last light of a February sunset. I barely remember her, just impressions, warmth, laughter, the smell of roses. My father remarried within the year. My stepmother was not unkind exactly, but not warm either. She had her own son to raise. I was merely an inconvenience. I am sorry. Do not be. The loneliness made me strong. The neglect made me self-sufficient. I would not be who I am today if I had been coddled and loved. You would be happier. He glanced at her, surprised. Would I? Being loved does not make one weak. It makes one complete. You speak as if from experience. I speak as if from hope. She smiled, and something shifted in his expression, softened somehow. I was never loved by my family, but I always believed that somewhere, someday, I might find someone who would see me clearly and love what they saw. I refused to let my mother's cruelty kill that hope. And do you think— He stopped, something uncharacteristically hesitant in his voice. Do you think you might have found that person? The question hung between them, fragile and enormous. Rowena thought of the past 2 weeks, the conversations that had ranged from agriculture to philosophy to childhood memories, the way he listened when she spoke, as if her words were precious and rare. The restraint he had shown, never pushing past her boundaries, never taking what she had not offered. The fury in his eyes when he spoke of her mother, the tenderness in his hands when he touched her face. I think, she said carefully, that I am beginning to believe it is possible. That night, she went to his chambers. Not because the fortnight was over, though it was. Not because she felt obligated. She had never felt less obligated in her life. But because somewhere between the conversations and the questions and the careful, patient way he had let her discover her own worth, she had begun to want him, really want him. It was a strange sensation for a woman who had never expected to want anything for herself. All her life, she had been taught to minimize her desires, to expect nothing, to be grateful for whatever crumbs of attention or affection came her way. But Ambrose had not given her crumbs. He had offered her a feast, and then stepped back to let her decide whether she wished to eat. And she was hungry. She was so desperately, achingly hungry. The corridor between her chambers and his was long and dark, lit only by a few candles in wall sconces that cast flickering shadows on the ancient stone. Her feet were bare, her nightgown thin, and she shivered as she walked, not from cold, but from anticipation, from nerves, from the terrifying knowledge that she was about to cross a threshold from which there was no return. He opened his door in shirt sleeves, his hair disheveled, clearly preparing for bed. The sight of him, unguarded, undressed, human in a way his armor never allowed, made something clench low in her stomach. Rowena. His voice was rough, as if he had been dragged from the edge of sleep. What? The fortnight is over. I know. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. and she saw something vulnerable in the gesture, something almost boyish beneath all that, controlled intensity. I had planned to give you more time, as much as you needed. I do not need more time. His eyes searched her face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that she did not mean what she was saying. She let him look. She had nothing to hide anymore. "You are certain," he said. It was not quite a question. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Something shifted in his expression then, some final barrier falling away, some last vestige of restraint dissolving. He reached for her, finally, and pulled her into his arms and kissed her like a man who had been starving for 3 years and had finally been allowed to feast. His hands were in her hair, on her waist, pressing her against him as if he could not bear even an inch of space between them. And Rowena kissed him back. She kissed him with all the hope she had hoarded for 23 years. She kissed him with the trust he had earned over 14 days. She kissed him with the hunger she had only just begun to understand, lived inside her, waiting for the right person to unlock it. His mouth was hot against hers, demanding and giving in equal measure. His hands moved over her body with a reverence that made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. He touched her as if she were precious, as if she were breakable, as if she were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "I have imagined this," he murmured against her lips, 1,000 times, 10,000, but the reality— He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against hers, his breath coming fast and uneven. "The reality far exceeds the fantasy." "Then stop talking," she whispered, "and show me." When he lifted her and carried her to his bed, she went willingly. When he undressed her, slowly, reverently, as if unwrapping the most precious gift he had ever received, she did not look away. And when he finally made her his, when he moved above her and within her, and she felt herself dissolving into sensation, she understood what it meant to be truly seen, truly wanted, truly loved. Later, as they lay tangled together in sheets that smelled of him, of them, of something new and wholly theirs, he pressed his lips to her hair and said, "I have waited 3 years for this." Was it worth the wait? Every moment of agony. His arms tightened around her. Every sleepless night. Every portrait commissioned, every scheme plotted. He tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. All of it was worth it for this. For you. Rowena felt tears prick at her eyes, not of sadness, but of something she could not quite name. Joy, perhaps, or gratitude, or the overwhelming sensation of being exactly where she was always meant to be. "I love you," she said, and the words came out easier than she had expected, as if they had been waiting inside her all along, just needing the right moment to emerge. His breath caught. "Say it again." "I love you." Again. "I love you, Ambrose Carrington, Duke of Dunmore. I love you, and I suspect I will spend the rest of my life finding new ways to tell you so." He kissed her then, soft and slow and full of promise. And Rowena thought that perhaps happy endings were not just for fairy tales after all. But happy endings, I have learned, are rarely the end of the story. They are merely the end of the beginning. And what came next for Rowena and Ambrose would test everything they had built together. It started with a house party. 3 months into their marriage, Ambrose announced that they would be hosting a gathering of political allies and business associates at Dunmore Park. 30 guests for a fortnight. Lords and ladies, merchants and industrialists, the powerful and the ambitious, all converging on the estate Rowena had come to love. "This is your chance to establish yourself," Ambrose told her as they reviewed the guest list together. "These people have heard rumors about my mysterious bride. Now they will see the reality, and the reality will exceed their every expectation." Rowena was less certain. 3 months was not long enough to erase 23 years of conditioning. She still flinched sometimes when she caught sight of herself in mirrors, still half-expected servants to sneer at her, still waited for the moment when Ambrose would see through whatever illusion had made him want her, and find only the plain, worthless woman her mother had always described. But she did not share these fears with her husband. He had given her so much already: confidence, purpose, a love that felt almost too vast to comprehend. She would not burden him with the shadows that still lurked in the corners of her mind. The guests arrived. On a gray March afternoon, their carriages stretching down the long drive like a procession of judgment. Rowena stood beside Ambrose in the great entrance hall, her spine straight, her smile practiced, her heart pounding with a terror she refused to show. "Breathe," Ambrose murmured, his hand warm at the small of her back. "They are going to adore you. And if they do not, then I will destroy them." He said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, that she almost laughed. "No one insults my wife and remains standing." The first day passed in a blur of introductions and pleasantries. Rowena moved through the crowd with a grace she had not known she possessed, making conversation, remembering names, playing the role of duchess with a competence that surprised even herself. By dinner, she had charmed 3 lords, impressed 2 ladies known for their cutting tongues, and earned a grudging nod of approval from a countess who had been skeptical about the match. "You are magnificent," Ambrose whispered in her ear as they took their seats at the head of the long dining table. "I told you they would adore you." But not everyone adored her. Lord Bartholomew Wrexham arrived late on the second day, a tall, golden-haired man with a reputation for charm and a fortune built on shipping. He swept into the entrance hall with the confidence of someone who expected every room to rearrange itself around his presence. And when his eyes landed on Rowena, something flickered in their depths that made her uncomfortable. "The mysterious Duchess of Dunmore," he said, bowing over her hand with a flourish that lasted a moment too long. "I confess, when I heard Dunmore had married, I expected someone more conventional." "Conventional, my lord. Beautiful in the expected ways. Golden hair, blue eyes, the standard society portrait." His gaze traveled over her face with an assessment that felt almost clinical. "You are not that at all. You are something far more interesting." Rowena extracted her hand from his grip. "I shall take that as a compliment." "You should. Conventional beauties are common. Women like you are rare." He smiled, and there was something predatory in it. "I look forward to getting to know you better, Your Grace." He moved past her before she could respond, and Rowena was left with a chill running down her spine and a sense that something dangerous had just entered her home. She told Ambrose about the encounter that evening as they dressed for dinner. "Wrexham has always been too bold," Ambrose said, his voice carefully neutral. "He mistakes his wealth for permission to behave however he wishes. Should I be concerned? You should be vigilant. But no." He crossed to where she sat at her dressing table and placed his hands on her shoulders, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You should not be concerned. You are my wife. Any man who forgets that will be reminded in ways he will not enjoy." Rowena nodded, reassured, but she did not miss the tension in his jaw or the way his fingers tightened briefly on her shoulders before releasing. She should have paid more attention to both. The trouble began on the 5th day of the house party. Rowena was in the library, reviewing the accounts she had taken over from Mrs. Blackwood, when she heard voices in the corridor outside. One of them was Lord Wrexham's. She recognized the smooth, confident tone immediately. The other was female, high and tinkling, belonging to Lady Pemberton, one of the more gossipy guests. "Cannot imagine what he sees in her," Lady Pemberton was saying. "She is so dreadfully plain. And her family, well, you heard about the scandal with the sister." "Perhaps that is precisely the appeal." Wrexham's voice dropped to a conspiratorial murmur. "A plain wife with a desperate family is a wife who cannot afford to make demands. Dunmore always was practical above all else. You think he does not love her. I think Dunmore is incapable of love. I think he married a woman who would be grateful for any attention, who would not expect fidelity or affection, who would manage his household and bear his heirs and ask no questions about how he spends his nights." Rowena's hands had gone cold on the ledger. She knew she should stop listening. She knew that eavesdroppers rarely heard good of themselves. But she could not move, could not look away from the crack in the library door through which these poisonous words were filtering. "And what of her?" Lady Pemberton asked. "Do you think she loves him?" "I think she is intelligent enough to know her situation. A woman like that does not attract attention from a duke without understanding that something unusual is happening. She may believe his pretty speeches, women often do, but some part of her must know that she is not the kind of woman men like Dunmore actually want. How sad for her. How convenient for me." There was a smile in Wrexham's voice. "A neglected wife is a vulnerable wife, and I have always found vulnerability appealing." Their footsteps receded down the corridor, and Rowena sat frozen in the library, her heart pounding, her mind racing. It was not true. None of it was true. But some part of her, the part that had been shaped by 23 years of her mother's voice, whispered that perhaps it was. Perhaps Ambrose had married her precisely because she was plain, because she was desperate, because she would be so grateful for any scrap of affection that she would not notice if he strayed, would not complain if he neglected her, would not expect anything beyond the basic duties of a duchess. Perhaps the portraits, the declarations, the careful courtship, perhaps all of it had been a performance, designed to secure her loyalty, to make her compliant, to ensure that she would never question him, never challenge him, never realize that she was nothing more than a practical solution to the problem of needing an heir. It was not true, but she could not stop thinking about it. That evening at dinner, Rowena watched her husband with new eyes. She watched the way he spoke to Lady Marchmont, a beautiful widow whose low-cut gown displayed considerable assets. She watched the way Lady Marchmont leaned toward him, laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture that seemed far too familiar. She watched, and she felt something cold settle in her chest. After dinner, when the guests had retired to the drawing-room for cards and conversation, Rowena slipped away. She told herself she needed air. She told herself she was being ridiculous. She told herself that Lord Wrexham was a snake, and his words meant nothing. But when she reached the terrace overlooking the garden, she found she was not alone. "Your Grace." Lord Wrexham materialized from the shadows, a glass of brandy in one hand, his golden hair gleaming in the moonlight. "Taking some air." "I was seeking solitude, my lord. If you will excuse me, please." He stepped into her path, blocking her retreat. "Stay. I so rarely have the chance to speak with you alone." That is by design, Lord Wrexham. I am a married woman. Indeed you are. Married to a man who is currently laughing far too intimately with Lady Marchmont. His smile was sympathetic, understanding. It must be difficult, watching him with other women while you stand here alone. My husband is being courteous to a guest. There is nothing improper in his behavior. Is that what you tell yourself? He moved closer, and Rowena took an instinctive step back. I saw your face at dinner, Your Grace. I saw the doubt in your eyes. You are beginning to wonder if the fairy tale he sold you is actually true. You presume too much. I presume exactly enough. I have known men like Dunmore my entire life. They are incapable of genuine attachment. They acquire things, estates, businesses, wives, and they maintain those acquisitions just well enough to keep them functional. But love, he laughed softly. Love is beyond them. Rowena's throat was tight. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the truth, and because... He reached out, and before she could react, his fingers were brushing her cheek. Because I see something in you that Dunmore clearly does not. Something rare. Something worth appreciating. She slapped his hand away. Do not touch me. I apologize. He did not look apologetic. I merely wanted you to know that when you realize what your marriage truly is, there are other options available to you. Men who would appreciate you as you deserve. Men who would not force you to compete for attention with every beautiful woman in the room. Get away from me. As you wish, Your Grace. He stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. But remember what I said. And when you are ready to be honest with yourself, she said, get away from her. The voice came from the darkness behind them, cold, deadly, utterly without mercy. Rowena spun to find Ambrose emerging from the shadows of the garden, his face carved from ice, his eyes burning with a fury that made Wrexham's earlier predation seem almost quaint. Dunmore. Wrexham's voice had lost its smoothness. I know exactly what you were doing. Ambrose moved between Rowena and Wrexham, positioning his body as a barrier. You were attempting to seduce my wife by poisoning her mind against me, a strategy that requires both opportunity and her willingness to listen. He glanced back at Rowena, and something in his expression made her stomach drop. It seems you found one of those things. Ambrose, we will discuss this later. His voice was flat, distant, wrong. For now, he turned back to Wrexham. You will leave my home at first light tomorrow. You will not speak to my wife again. You will not speak of my wife again. And if I ever find you within 10 feet of her in any context, I will destroy you so thoroughly that your own mother will not remember your name. Do I make myself clear? Wrexham was pale now. All his earlier confidence evaporated. Perfectly clear. Good. Now get out of my sight. Wrexham fled. There was no other word for it. He fled into the house, leaving Rowena alone on the terrace with a husband whose fury had gone cold and quiet, and infinitely more frightening than any shout. Ambrose, why were you out here with him? I was not out here with him. I came for air. He followed me. And you listened to him. Whatever poison he was pouring in your ear, you listened. Rowena felt tears prick at her eyes. He said things, terrible things, about why you married me, about what I really am to you. I know they were lies. But you wondered if they were true. His voice cracked on the last word. And suddenly, he did not look like the fearsome Duke of Dunmore at all. He looked like a man who had been stabbed. After everything I have shown you, everything I have told you, You wondered if I married you because you were convenient. I have spent 23 years being told I am worthless. The tears were falling now, hot and shameful. I cannot erase that in 3 months. I cannot silence the voice in my head that sounds like my mother, that tells me this cannot possibly be real, that no one like you could ever want someone like me. I am trying, Ambrose. I am trying so hard, but some wounds do not heal just because we wish them to. The silence stretched between them, painful and vast. Then he was crossing the distance, pulling her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I am sorry," he said into her hair. "I am sorry I left you alone with those vipers. I am sorry did not see Wrexham's intentions sooner. I am sorry your mother's voice still lives in your head, telling you lies that I should have destroyed months ago. It is not your fault. It is exactly my fault. I thought—" He pulled back, cupping her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I thought if I loved you enough, if I showed you enough, the damage would simply disappear. I forgot that you have had 23 years of poison, and I have given you only 3 months of antidote. You have given me everything. I have given you a start. But I see now that it is not enough to simply love you. I must also help you learn to believe that you deserve to be loved." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Will you let me do that? Will you let me spend the rest of our lives proving to you what you are worth?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." He kissed her then, not with passion, but with something deeper, something that felt like a vow. And in that moment, Rowena understood that the shadows in her mind would not disappear overnight. But she was not fighting them alone anymore. She would never be alone again. The house party ended early. Ambrose cited urgent business as the reason for cutting the gathering short, but everyone present understood the true cause. Lord Wrexham had been seen leaving at dawn the morning after his encounter with the Duchess, and whispers about the Duke's cold fury had spread through the remaining guests like wildfire. By the time the last carriage rolled down the drive, Rowena was exhausted, emotionally, physically, completely drained. She wanted nothing more than to collapse into bed and sleep for a week. But fate had other plans. "Your Grace," Mrs. Blackwood appeared in the doorway of Rowena's sitting room, her face grave. "There is someone here to see you. I am not receiving visitors. I think you will want to receive this one." The housekeeper's expression was unreadable. "It is your mother, Your Grace, Lady Holbrook." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Rowena's feet. "What?" "She arrived 10 minutes ago. She says she must speak with you. She says it is urgent." Rowena's first instinct was to refuse, to send her mother away without a word, without a glance, without any acknowledgement that the woman who had sold her like livestock deserved even a moment of her time. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the desire to face her demon rather than hide from it. Perhaps it was simply the knowledge that she could not move forward, while a part of her was still looking back. "Show her to the drawing room," Rowena said. "I will be there shortly." She took her time. She changed from her morning dress into something more formal, a gown of deep burgundy that made her feel powerful, sophisticated, utterly unlike the plain, trembling girl her mother remembered. She arranged her hair with care. She applied a touch of color to her lips. When she finally entered the drawing room, she did so as the Duchess of Dunmore, not as Rowena Holbrook, the worthless daughter, the burden, the disappointment. Her mother was standing by the window, her back to the door. She turned when Rowena entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Lady Elspeth Holbrook had aged. The months since the wedding had carved new lines into her face, dulled the shine of her hair, bent her shoulders with a weight that had not been there before. She was dressed well enough, but there was something shabby about her finery, last season's fashion, slightly worn at the cuffs. "Rowena," Lady Elspeth said, and her voice cracked on the name. "Lady Holbrook." Rowena kept her tone cool, distant. "Mrs. Blackwood said you wished to speak with me. Yes." Her mother's hands were trembling, Rowena noticed. Actually trembling. "I know I have no right to be here. I know what I did to you was unforgivable, but I had nowhere else to turn. How unfortunate for you. Please." Lady Elspeth took a step forward, then stopped, as if uncertain whether she was permitted to approach. "I know you hate me. I deserve your hatred. But I am desperate, Rowena. We are ruined. Your father's business has collapsed. Our debts have been called in. We have lost everything, the house, the carriages, the servants. I have been living on the charity of relatives who can barely stand to look at me. And you have come here for what? Money? I have come here to beg." Her mother's voice broke, and tears began streaming down her face. "I have nothing left, Rowena. Nothing but the clothes I am wearing and the few pounds in my purse. I cannot pay for lodging. I cannot pay for food. I am—" She choked on a sob. "I am going to die in the street if someone does not help me." Rowena watched her mother weep and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no rage. Just emptiness where something should have been. "You sold me," she said quietly. "You covered my face with a veil and sold me to a man you believed would hate me, just to save yourself from the consequences of Clarissa's choices. You did not care what happened to me. You said my misery would finally serve a purpose. I know." Lady Elspeth was sobbing openly now, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "I know what I did. I know what I am. I have had months to think about nothing else, months of watching everything I valued disappear, knowing that I brought it all on myself. Did you never think about what you were doing to me? In all those years of telling me I was worthless, of slapping me when I displeased you, of making me feel like a burden on my own family. Did you ever once consider the damage you were causing? No." The word came out as a whisper. "No, I did not. You were. You were not what I wanted. Not beautiful like Clarissa, not charming, not the daughter I had imagined. I resented you for that. I punished you for that. And I told myself it did not matter because you were just plain Rowena, the one nobody wanted. Yes." Her mother's face crumpled. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. And I am so sorry." The apology hung in the air between them, too little and far too late. Rowena turned away, walked to the window, looked out at the gardens she had come to love. She thought about the woman she had been 3 months ago, the woman who would have crumbled at her mother's tears, who would have forgiven anything just to earn a moment of approval. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone stronger, someone who understood that forgiveness was a gift, not an obligation, and that some people did not deserve gifts. But she also thought about Ambrose's words on the terrace, about the poison that still lived in her head, about the voice that sounded like her mother, always whispering that she was not enough. If she turned Lady Elspeth away, if she let her mother die in poverty and degradation, that voice would never fall silent. It would always be there, reminding her that she had become as cruel as the woman who raised her, that she had let hatred poison her the way her mother's hatred had poisoned everything it touched. She did not want to become that. "I will not give you money," Rowena said finally, still facing the window. "I will not restore your position or your comfort or your pride. You do not deserve any of those things." "I understand." Her mother's voice was hollow, defeated. "But I will ensure that you do not starve. I will arrange for modest lodging and a small allowance, enough to live on if you are careful. And I will do it not for your sake, but for mine, because I refuse to let you turn me into someone as hard and cruel as you are. Rowena, there is a condition." She turned back to face her mother, and her eyes were dry, her voice steady. "You will never contact me again. You will never speak of me to anyone. You will live out the rest of your days in the obscurity you have earned, and you will do so knowing that the daughter you threw away is the only reason you are not sleeping in the gutter." Lady Elspeth stared at her, at this stranger who wore her daughter's face, but spoke with the authority of a duchess. "I agree," she whispered, "to everything. Good. Mrs. Blackwood will show you out. I will have my solicitor contact you with the arrangements." She did not watch her mother leave. She stood at the window, looking out at the gardens, until she heard the front door close and the carriage wheels crunch on the gravel drive. And then she sat down, very slowly, and let herself feel everything she had been holding back. Ambrose found her there an hour later, tears streaming silently down her face. He did not ask what had happened. He did not demand explanations or offer platitudes. He simply sat down beside her, pulled her into his arms, and held her, while she wept out years of pain and rage and grief. When the tears finally stopped, she told him everything. "You showed her more mercy than she deserved," he said quietly, when she had finished. "I showed her exactly enough to live with myself, nothing more. You are a better person than I am. I would have let her rot." "No, you would not." Rowena looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen, but somehow clearer than they had been in months. "You would have done exactly what I did, because you understand that revenge is not about destroying your enemy. It is about refusing to let them destroy you." He was silent for a long moment. "When did you become so wise?" "Somewhere between the wedding and now, I think. Somewhere between believing I was worthless and realizing I was not." She took his hand, laced her fingers through his. "You helped me see my own value. Now I have shown my mother exactly what that value is, by rising above her, not by sinking to her level. I love you," he said. "Have I told you that today?" "Only 3 times. You are slipping." "I love you." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I love you." Her cheek. "I love you." Her lips. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it again." One more thing happened that spring, something that made everything else seem small by comparison. On a warm April morning, while reviewing the household accounts with Mrs. Blackwood, Rowena suddenly felt the room tilt around her. She gripped the edge of the desk, her vision swimming, and barely managed to gasp out an apology before darkness claimed her. She woke to find herself in bed, with Ambrose sitting beside her looking more frightened than she had ever seen him. "What happened?" she asked, her voice weak. "You fainted. The doctor has been sent for?" His hand was clutching hers so tightly it almost hurt. "If anything happens to you, I'm fine. I simply felt dizzy for a moment." But when the doctor arrived and completed his examination, he was smiling. "Your Grace," he said, addressing Ambrose, "I am pleased to inform you that the Duchess is not ill. She is, in fact, in excellent health. She is also—" He paused, his smile widening. "She is with child." Rowena's breath stopped. With child. She was going to be a mother. She looked at Ambrose and saw her own shock reflected in his eyes. Shock that slowly transformed into wonder, into joy, into something so vast and overwhelming that neither of them could find words for it. "A child," he breathed. "Our child." "Our child," she confirmed. And then she was laughing and crying, and he was gathering her into his arms and holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Because she was. She finally, truly believed she was. And so, my friends, we come to the end of our story, though not the end of theirs. Rowena gave birth to a daughter that winter, a perfect, healthy girl, with her mother's brown hair and her father's gray eyes. They named her Eleanor, after the grandmother Ambrose barely remembered, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she was loved fiercely, completely, without condition. "I will never let her believe she is worthless," Rowena whispered one night, cradling Eleanor in the moonlit nursery. "I will never compare her to anyone. I will never let her doubt her own value. She will know her worth from the moment she can understand the concept." Ambrose agreed, standing beside her with an expression of wonder that softened all his sharp edges, because she will be raised by a mother who knows her own. It was the greatest revenge of all, Rowena realized, not the destruction of Lady Elspeth, though that had been satisfying in its way. Not the social triumph of becoming one of the most respected duchesses in England. But this, breaking the cycle of cruelty that had poisoned her family for generations, raising her daughter to believe she was loved. This was what her mother had stolen from her. This was what she would give to Eleanor, and to the two more children who followed, a son with his father's ambition and his mother's kindness, and another daughter with enough spirit to charm anyone she met. They grew old together, the Duke and Duchess of Dunmore, in the great house that had once seemed so intimidating and had become the warmest of homes. Their children married for love, because their parents had taught them that love was the only currency that truly mattered. Their grandchildren filled the halls with laughter and chaos, and all the noise of a family that knew itself to be treasured. And on quiet evenings, when the fire burned low and the house was still, Rowena would sometimes catch her husband watching her. Still, after all these years, with that same intensity he had shown on their wedding night. "What are you thinking?" she would ask. "I am thinking," he would reply, "that the luckiest moment of my life was when your sister eloped. That seems a strange thing to be grateful for. Not strange at all. Her foolishness gave me you, and you—" He would reach for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers as naturally as breathing. "You gave me everything else. And that, my friends, is the story of Rowena Holbrook, the woman who was sold like goods, veiled like shame, and sent to a man everyone expected to destroy her. Instead, she destroyed the people who had underestimated her. Instead, she became a duchess in truth as well as name. Instead, she found the love she had spent 23 years believing she did not deserve. Some stories end with a wedding. This one began with one. A wedding built on deception and desperation, on a mother's cruelty and a sister's betrayal. But what grew from that bitter soil was something beautiful, something true, something that proved once and for all that the people society dismisses as worthless are often the ones most worth knowing. Rowena Holbrook was told she was nothing. She became everything. and the man who saw her true worth before anyone else, the feared Duke who had watched and waited and planned, spent the rest of his life proving to her that she had always been enough. I am already working on the next story, and let me tell you, it might be even more intense than this one. Subscribe so you do not miss it, and leave a comment telling me where you are listening from. I will see you soon. Until next time, take care of your hearts.